coordinates Voices for Creative Nonviolence, a campaign to end U.S. military and economic warfare. As a co-founder of Voices in the Wilderness, she helped form 70 delegations from '96 to 2003 that openly defied economic sanctions by bringing medicines to children and families in Iraq. Kathy and her companions lived in Baghdad throughout the 2003 Shock and Awe campaign. More recently, she has visited Gaza and Pakistan, writing eyewitness accounts of war's impact on civilians. Kathy also recently returned from time in Afghanistan and Pakistan. She was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison for planting corn on nuclear missile silos and served 3 months in 2004 for crossing the line at Fort Benning's military training school. Kathy is a contributing author to Iraq Under Siege. In 2005, she wrote and published Other Lands Have Dreams, From Baghdad to Peking Prison. Kathy has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 times.
همونطور که شیدا توضیح داد، من لازم نیست دوباره کامل توضیح بدم، ولی من میگم خیلی خوشحالم که به عنوان جمعیت ایرانی امروز مهمان همچین زن شجاعی هستیم. خانم کلی به عنوان یکی از اعضای Voices for Creative Nonviolence در کمپینی که علیه سیاست‌های نظامی آمریکا فعالیت داشتن هستن و فعالیت میکنن. همچنین به عنوان یکی از هماهنگ کننده‌های Voices in the Wilderness در سال 96 تا 2003 به 70 تا گروه مختلف کمک کردن که به کودکان عراقی دارو برسونن و خیلی خوشحالم که امروز ایشون رو داریم.
It's a pleasure to introduce Kathy Kelly.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a privilege to be here with you today and to be able to join in deepest respect for all of the people who have been so steadfast in demanding the release of those who are still in prison and in standing with those whose arms will ache longingly for loved ones who will never return. The greatest disappointment of my adult life was that in spite of working so hard, Mani Mostofi, Bita Mostofi, Farah Mokhtarazadeh, so many people with Voices in the Wilderness worked hard to end the economic sanctions against Iraq. But we weren't able to do it. We failed hundreds of thousands of children. And those children were punished to death. Brutally and lethally punished, they committed no crime. And they were punished by an economic kind of warfare. It was almost as though the United States was saying to people in Iraq, look, we had to start starving you so we could stop bombing you. And then with the onslaught of the shock and awe attack and invasion, we had to start bombing you so we could stop starving you. And so the cycle went on, and the cycle of viciousness continues today. And so I hear your chants, no more war, no more sanctions, and it touches me in the deep heart's core, and I want to be motivated by the energy and the art and the commitment that you bring. And perhaps I could say just a little bit of what did we learn in those years of campaigning to end the economic sanctions. Certainly none of us wanted to see Saddam Hussein remain in power. But we could see that the longer you isolated people in Iraq, the more you strengthened Saddam Hussein. Or let me put it this way, if any country wants to help another country rid themselves of tyrannous oppression and brutal dictatorship, then the formula must be to strengthen education, strengthen communication, strengthen social services. We can guarantee you economic sanctions will weaken social services needed by people who are amongst the poorest in Iran, as was true in Iraq. Economic sanctions will isolate people's chance to communicate with an outside world. Economic sanctions will isolate people from education that's needed. So let us not be lulled into thinking that because the latest round of economic sanctions seem not to be so severe, the previous rounds of economic sanctions are taking a toll, and they should be protested, and we must speak up. And yes, let us have our hearts open to an older generation in Iran the ballistic attacks, the aerial attacks, the chemical attacks. An older generation that I think by rights might feel, yes, we need to take refuge in some kind of nationalism. But the more that you isolate people, the more they might be vulnerable to the manipulation of nationalism, which we know the hardliners in Iran have engaged in, and which now cost the lives of people who languish in prisons and who have been killed. A cautionary tale. I was in Jenin during a time when the Israeli Air Force bombed 100 three-story buildings so that they just became smithereens. And we were walking through rubble and also picking out the bones of people who had been killed. And that terrible usage of conventional weaponry against a civilian population. We took photos. What could you do but try to bring the word out? And we enlarged and laminated those photos. And I happened to be on deck to be the next one over to Baghdad. So I took the laminated photos to Baghdad and I showed them to friends of mine in Baghdad, and they wept. They cried over the terrible suffering that Palestinians had experienced in Jenin. This was April of 2002. 1 year later, those same homes that I stood in, where people wept for the Palestinians, twice-made refugees, were destroyed. A cautionary tale. The reckless people who use the conventional and the nuclear and the biological weaponry cannot be trusted. We have to find community and raise our voices, and one of the ways to stop a next war is to continue to tell the truth about the present war, including economic warfare against Iran. And we must also keep an awareness that as we want to say that the development, the storage, the sale, and the use of any kind of nuclear weaponry is always wrongful, here we are in the country, on earth and in history, that has developed, sold, stored, and used more weapons of mass destruction than any other country on earth. Here we are in the country that aided and abetted Israel in developing 200 to 400 thermonuclear weapons. Here we are in the country that has shown so much recklessness. So as we look for restraint, we must restrain the people at the helm of power, in the elites in London, in Washington, and throughout the world, where people have accommodated the killing, the destruction, and the potential elimination of our planet through nuclear weaponry. What to do? We can all join together in changing our own lifestyles. There is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people. And certainly, we don't want menacing military might to protect our capacity to live an indefensible lifestyle of overconsumption. So these are among the markers that help guide us as we move forward as a globalized community, motivated by those who have made such sacrifice in Iran, in the Green Movement, and by the vigilance that you've shown in your time here and now. Thank you, and with deepest respect.